Welcome to Wild and Exposed, your number one adventure, nature, and outdoor photography podcast. Wild and Exposed is hosted by Michael Mauro, Ron Hayes, and Jason Loftus. Thanks for tuning in.
And our guest tonight, Brandon Day, coming to us from Littleton, Colorado, was on that trip with Mike. So we're going to kind of talk about it from a participant's standpoint. And we are going to ask some hard questions and find out just what kind of workshop leader Michael was and where we could see improvement with his performance. But welcome, Brandon, to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited, yeah.
I mean, I saw Brandon's name on the list, but I had no clue he was from Denver. I had no clue what he looked like. I had no clue, and you really don't with a lot of the participants from these workshops. So when I got there and we started talking a little bit and I found out he's from Denver and found out kind of his backstory, I told him we should get him on the podcast and talk about a retrospect and just how it went. And as someone that might want to take one of our workshops, what they can expect from a participant's point of view.
So Brandon, Mike set the table. It's a pretty easy cleanup.
Sure.
Go ahead and tell us about your background. How did you get started?
So I'm an automotive photographer and I love cars. And so I've photographed cars for a long time, but there's 5 months, we'll say, out of the year where a lot of those sports cars just get put away. And it's a little bit hard to tune your photography skills, right? And so it was a natural progression. And next thing you know, me and my wife were looking in our backyard and we're like, oh, look, there's a little bird. It's like, oh, look, there's a little bird with yellow. Oh, look, there's a little bird with some orange. And next thing you know, we have Colorado bird books. And it just happened so that the Wild and Exposed team was going to Alaska. And I got this Instagram post that, oh, join us on the bear trip. And I was like, why not? The wife said, I think you should do it. It's like, all right, here we go. And so I signed up not knowing a lick of what I was going to do. I knew I was going to be on a boat in Alaska filming brown bears. And so it got me through the next 6 months and I got everything set up and got to Alaska. It was 6 hours to Anchorage, I think. And then I had a 4-hour layover and then a short little 45-minute flight into Homer. At that point in time, you're pretty nervous, right? You're like, have I brought the right equipment? What am I getting myself into? Then there's this time in between where you'd leave early in the morning. I think it was 2 a.m. when they finally departed the marina. And you go to sleep and then you wake up and all of a sudden you're in the middle of Alaska seas and there's mountains all side. And I'd never been to Alaska, so it was a bit of a shock for me in that you come outside and there's these mountains that just reach up to the sky. You can't even see the top. There's clouds all the way around you. And you're just cruising along the water. And so you go upstairs and the crew had already made breakfast and everything. And so oh, hi, good morning. And they're so nice and pleasurable. And you're just out of your element, right? And so you're sitting there eating and you're like, am I dreaming? I don't know. Is this real life, right? And so you kind of get to that and the guide sits you down and he's like, okay, so these are brown bears and they're still wild animals. And he gives you like the bear talk, right? And we're going to stay with a group and you don't go off by yourself and all the normal things that we hear. But it just hasn't sunk in, right? And so then we stop at the first place and they start offloading these giant Zodiacs. They're like, yep, we're going to put you on that. Just put your camera gear on, like suit up and get your camera gear on. Like, oh, okay. So I throw my pack on and they load us up and you're on there with 4 or 3 other people. And I got Michael on mine and a few other. They start scooting into this area and it's 20 inches of water maybe. And jump out of the Zodiac and sure enough, there's land down there and it's just open, right? And so there's a glacier up on the top and these mountains surrounding you and they're like, okay, we're going to look for bears. Okay, where are the bears? And so like me being from Colorado, brown bears to me are just like, they're exciting, but they're still an apex predator, right? Because the mainstream media has made them out to be just these terrible man-eating vicious monsters, right? And so like the whole time, like the hair on the back of your neck is prickling and everything. And finally, like the guide and Michael are like, "Oh yeah, there's one." And so all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, okay, there's one." And so like you get hyped up and you're like, you pull out your big lens and you're waiting for it, and it's 500 yards off, and I'm taking pictures like, "Oh, I got my first brown bear." You're really excited. And so I'm like giving Michael the thumbs up, and he's shaking his head like, "Look at this guy. Like he doesn't even know." And so then they get us down to the river, and this bear's been fishing, and he's maybe, I don't know, 300 yards off. Does that sound about right, Michael? He was a long ways off. But it was like, okay, I've got my bear. Like, trip is done. I got the picture, got my video. I even got an eagle off in the background. And he's just kind of smiling and shaking his head. And then the second bear comes off and walks from the left into the picture. And it was like 100 yards. And it was one of those like, oh my gosh, am I okay? Do I need to get closer? Do we need to move? Do I need to start like booking it? Like you start worrying, right? And Michael's just filming away, and I'm like, all right, he's filming, I'm gonna film, and so we just filmed away, and it was like it was a female, and she'd walked by, and it was and went and fished, and it was one of those. I remember looking at Michael, and my eyes had to be the size of dinner plates, but I just remember being so excited, and it was like, okay, I've done it. Like we got the bear, I got a video. Everything is right in the world. Let's go home. And he was like, this isn't nothing. 2 bears is nothing. And I got back and I offloaded those pictures as fast as I could. I didn't even get them on the second hard drive before I started clicking through Lightroom. And it was just an exciting time. So that was the first day. And it just got better from there. But
Okay, so that's day one.
that was day one.
Well, encounter
day two,
number
I
one.
guess.
Encounter
Yeah.
number one for you, right? Brown
Yep.
bear encounter.
Yep.
So you're kind of in awe a little bit.
Oh, I was like starstruck.
So as you move into the next day, and I'm sure this is where you were headed, but as you move into the next day, had your expectations changed? And what kind of conversations did you guys have on the boat? Was everybody else at the same level of excitement as you?
I don't know what the other trips were like, but I think there were some really good photographers on our trip. I don't know about the other ones because I wasn't there, but I remember going back and I was surrounded by some people that had taken, like, there was 2 bird photographers on there that were exceptional in that area, real photographers. And so it was interesting to see their perspective. All of us were kind of enamored, I think, in that first day. And so a lot of us had the same shots. And so same type of criticism that you'd hear, I think, from any first time person, like it's a 3-legged bear, right? Because you're not getting them, because they have that overstep walk where they walk with the back foot and the front foot at the same time, but the front foot goes in front of the front foot. And you get them as 3-legged bears a lot, or their foot's not out of the water or something like that. And so we had a lot of the same photos in that regard. And it was, being that it was so far off, a lot of us have that same long shot where it was right at us. So I guess my expectations, mine personally, were really confused because I was shooting primarily video up there. And so video, one of the biggest problems you have with video with wildlife is the story perspective, right? And so with video, you always want to be telling a story. And with photos, you want to tell a story. If you can tell a story through photos, you're exceptional. It's that much harder, right? And so, but with video, you're always trying to capture those little moments that lead to that story. And that story is comprised of all these little moments that are part of the plot. But then you need some sort of conflict that arises with wildlife. And sometimes that's a little hard because, I mean, an elk eating grass is not a conflict, right? And so you get that in a little bit of the few weeks a year where you can create a conflict, but it's a little tough. And so my mind was just constantly going of, well, I'm getting good B-roll, but what's the story? What am I trying to do here? And I'll be honest, I didn't get it on this trip. I probably need, I don't know, 5 more trips to probably fill in a story. I got 3 minutes of good video that I've posted on the YouTube, but it's been hard for me to create a story just around the wildlife. Now, there's a story about me going out into that, but that's a little bit of a tenuous area, right? You don't want people just marching out into the area and trying to film brown bears. Um, and so that's been another area where I'm learning on the wildlife side. But going into that second day, I was thinking, okay, well, I need some establishing shots of the setting, right? Because you always need a character and a setting for those. The character is obviously your bear and yourself. And then the setting is Alaska, but you need those settings that establish that shot, right? And so you need the wide angle, you need that medium shot, you need a really close-up shot. And it's just hard to do in a day. And so you're constantly just trying to change all of these different shots, but you're trying to shoot the same bear. From that first area, I'm like, okay, well, a bear fishing in a river is going to be hard to establish that. We get to the second area, and it was one of those things where you go to sleep and then you wake up in this other area, and it's just like this magical area. And you're in this cove, and it's quiet, and there's no wake. And you go up in this river, and it was the most clear water I've ever seen. Like, I have a video that I dunked my iPhone under there, and I got the pictures of the salmon. There's a whole video of salmon swimming under the water with an iPhone. I didn't even use a GoPro. And so you walk into this area, and there's this hill that you have to crest, and there's two bears that were just already fishing, munching down on fish. And it was like, okay, well, I think I can start to do this. And then there was another bear that came in, and another bear, and so it started to get easier to make those stories. But for me, it was so exciting that it was hard not to, like, you just want to take that one picture where they're so close up, right? Just because it's so exciting. And you got to tell yourself, you already have that shot. You don't need them at 600 millimeters as close as possible. And so that's the hard part for me on that second day. I ended up shooting with the 70 to 200 to just force myself to not take those pictures.
But we should go into more detail on day number 2, because I mean, like Brandon was saying, day 1, we're at a place where it was just exciting for everybody to see a bear. And when you see a bear, like you said, 500 yards off, and you get your pictures, for me as a host, or Dave, when you refer to the guide, just so the audience knows, Dave Backrack is our actual bear guide. So he knows these bears backwards and forwards. So when you hear Brandon talk about a guide, that's who that is. But when we see that first bear, for Dave and myself, it's like, whew, okay, we got a bear. People have pictures. Now we can really get to the good stuff. But we knew we weren't going to get the good stuff at this first place. But we stopped at this first place because it's such a long ride on the boat that you can get antsy. Everybody gets antsy. They're like, we just paid all this money to go on this trip, and we've just spent 12 hours on a boat. Well, and in fact, didn't we stop and shoot some sea lions?
Yeah,
beforehand, because it was like
slid by him.
Yeah, we didn't stop. We just kind of floated really slow by
and I
him.
took like 500 photos of sea lions
because everybody's so excited, right? So we had the sea lions and we had the bears out of the way as far as finding them. But then day 2, which I had never been to this place where we went day 2, and like Brandon was saying, you crest over this little hill and you see this clear water. And it's like, holy Moses. It's like amazingly beautiful. And then here comes the bears. So take it from day 2 now, having this experience being so close. And remember that situation where half the group wanted to go back to the boat? And we decided
I didn't know
to
if
stay.
we wanted to talk about that.
I think so. Let's talk about it.
We've already talked about it. So go ahead and give us the details.
Okay, so they're like half the group, they had checked the box. Like they got their bear photos for the day. It was pretty miserable. It started raining, the tide had changed, so the bears had gone away for a bit. And they wanted to go back in. And I remember looking at Michael and a few of the other ones, and I was like, I want to stay as much as I can. Like, I don't want to be on a boat, right? I got the patch behind my ear because I was worried about getting seasick, and I'm pretty sure I would have. So, like, I don't want to be on the boat at all. And so they're begging Michael, and he's like, I think we can do that. And so they worked it out. So half the group would go back, and they got on the Zodiac and booked it in. And the rest of us went a little further because we were a smaller group. And we got to the spot where there's this beautiful waterfall coming down. And I think there was one fishing up on the top of the falls. There was one kind of middle of the area, and then there was um, a big sow sitting on this rock just watching it all kind of. And then there was a big male. He was sleeping though, and he would wake up occasionally and peer out at the water. And no, I don't want to deal with it. And he'd go back to sleep. And so I have the 70 to 200 on. It is pouring rain. I'm down in this water, and it's probably up to my waist. And I'm filming, right? So I have a tripod. I have a shotgun microphone on top. I have this camera, and then I have all the rain stuff all over it. I have a bug net on and all my rain gear on. And the one that's sitting at the bottom of the waterfall decides, well, I want to see what this thing is. It's come over here. And so it turns around and it looks at me. It's one of those moments where you lock eyes with this predator. And it's like, I mean, I'm not a little guy, but this thing was just a giant. Like if these things come down from a spaceship and they come in the middle of the cities, we're going to think they're monsters, right? Yeah. And so you're staring at this thing eye to eye. And it was one of those moments where it's humbling. You're like, okay, this is a big creature. And she looks at me and she looks at this rock and decides, okay. And she just pulls up this rock that has to weigh as much as I do. And she just moves it just moves it. Okay, there's nothing under there. There's no fish under this rock. Weird. And then just sits back down. And it turns out later, talking to Dave, that it was a nervous behavior because this other bear was starting to come out. And she knew she was going to lose that fishing spot. And so she was just nervous and she was trying to find things to do. And so this other bear ends up coming by me. And it's, I don't know, how deep was that pool, Michael? 10 feet probably. It was enough that the bear had to swim by me. But it's just downpouring, right? You have your raincoat and your hood up. And so all you can hear is the rain over top of your hood. And this bear comes by, and it was one of those moments where everything else just goes silent. And it looks at me, and it just kind of smells and then does that chuff that they do. And it was okay, you're good. You're not a fish. I'm just going to keep moving. And I'm just trying to film, and I'm sure the film is just so shaky because I'm oh my gosh, this is happening. And I'm so excited, a little bit nervous. And I'm looking at Dave and I'm looking at Michael, and Michael's just head down filming. I'm okay, he's not worried. I shouldn't be worried, I guess. And so, and they come in, and sure enough, this one pushes that bear out, and they do this little growl. And so my eyes, I'm sure, are just big, oh my gosh, we're going to see a fight. Are they going to eat us? And nothing, just, she moves off and goes away. And it's not a big deal. But I don't know, it's just such a magical, well, first it's humbling, right? It reminds you that first, wild animals are wild. Second, they demand respect. And then there's just that, which is one of the reasons I love being out in nature, is that just everything around Mother Nature, as we'll call it, the tide, the bears, the salmon, you got to respect it because it's going to tear you apart if you don't. But if you do, you can be in part of it and you can observe it, and it's magical, absolutely magical moments. And so the fact I got some of that on film was just really cool. I mean, I got this picture of this bear sitting at the bottom of this waterfall, just chilling, and the water's just going down this waterfall, and it's like a painting. And I don't know. So it was really cool. We got to stay out there for another 4 hours, I think, and got some really good stuff.
So
but it was
what I picked up a fourth point out of that story, and that was that, I mean, we're all about figuring out what kind of guide Michael was. And the fourth point that I heard, I kind of picked up the subliminal message that Mike really wasn't concerned about his participants at all. He was...
No, I think he was. He made us bathe in butter and salt and pepper. So I don't think he was too worried about it.
Yeah, no, that sounds like what I was picking up.
No, he was a good guide. He being video, it was really helpful for me because I mean, I'm still a novice when it comes to video. I came from the photography side, and I don't know, like you guys do some video. Coming from the photography side and then trying to do video is almost worse than learning video from the ground up, I would say, just because you start with photography and you're like, okay, I need a shutter speed to do this. And you kind of have three different things that you can be changing, right? And that's your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. But with video, like you can't change your shutter. Like you just got, well, you can. It's just not going to be cinematic, right? As the YouTubers would call it. And so you really just kind of turn that off and you have two things. But then with wildlife, you're usually shooting in darker or not very well lit studios, right? And so get rid of the aperture. And so really it's your ISO. And you're using these VNDs and you're trying to learn about stops. And you thought you knew about stops until you really try to throw a filter on the end of it. And then you try to use these like variable ones and they start putting like X patterns into your feed. And you're like, why is this X pattern in my feed? And you're like, oh, it's because I'm using a variable and they don't actually work very well. And so it's just this learning that I think if I would have started with video and you just would have learned that, well, if you're going to shoot in 30 frames per second, you just need to be at 1/60, and you just don't have that hope that, well, I can just change my shutter speed to make it better or worse. And so being that I'm on the video side, it was helpful to have Michael there because I could ask him like, hey, are you shooting log? And yeah, it was good from that perspective. I will say I probably gained 10 pounds while I was on this trip because the chef that was on the boat was absolutely fantastic. And she would make these things that I didn't even know I liked. And I'd have two servings and then she'd like pack a lunch for it and she'd be like, oh, here's your snacks. And I'm like, thanks, Mom. This is great. Like, but I'm surprised they didn't have to push me out and float me down the river.
Well, in reality, too, you're not walking that far. I mean, the most we walked was that first day because you just have to. But when you get to these really intimate areas that Brandon's describing, you might, well, one, I guess we walked a little ways, but the first one we're talking about right now, you ride a Zodiac to as close as you can, and then you just pretty much pop over a hill, which might be 50 yards.
Yeah.
And then you basically just sit there for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, depending on the tide. So you don't get a ton of exercise, really. I mean, so it is easy to gain that 10 pounds.
When it's cold, like being that I was doing video, I wanted to be in the water. And so when you first start out, you're like, okay, I'm kind of warm. And so you take off some of your layers and you put them in your bag. And after 4 hours of sitting in this 50-degree water, you start to get a little cold. And so you throw on more layers and then you run out of layers and then it starts raining on you. And so you're like, I got to move. And so you try to move a little bit, but you're trying not to disturb anything, right? And so I would say if you're going up there, make sure you have your layers figured out with a good base, good mid layer, good wind layers, and then definitely bring a bug net because there wasn't a spot that we stopped at that we didn't wear bug nets. And there was a few participants that didn't bring some, and I think they borrowed some from Michael because he had. Would you buy out the store, Michael?
Yeah, I carry a bunch usually just so everybody has them.
He had one for his camera too.
Yeah, because you can't let them get into that fan. But along the lines of being in the water, so if we get to a location where it's safe to be in the water and we're not going to disrupt the bears, it's pretty awesome, right? Because you can get, and this is where the waders come into play too, what Brandon said earlier. If you're wearing chest waders, I mean, you can be right up to almost the top of those waders, and then your camera is right on the water, and you can get some pretty amazing images and video. But the consequence is you sit there for 4 hours, and I never did it. I did it a couple times, but not for 4 hours. And man, there was a couple of people that had a hard time standing up after being in that water for so long.
Well, and the tide's changing too, right? So you can't just sit down and chill out because all of a sudden your seat is underwater and then your chest is underwater. So you're constantly, it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And so you're trying to figure out, okay, do I still have an escape route to be able to get out of here and get my equipment out of there? So but it was a good area. I mean, that was probably one of my favorite areas on that trip.
So I love the fact that you guys stuck it out and it paid off. You know what I mean? It's very rarely do I hear of a situation where you decide to stick it out and it doesn't pay off. You know what I mean? So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, we sat there through that rainstorm, and it was I had an umbrella because just the video camera is too hard to put a cover on it. And man, it poured on us for 45 minutes, probably a serious downpour.
Yep.
But it totally paid off because that was some of the coolest stuff. Not necessarily shooting, but just some of the coolest stuff we saw. Or, me just getting to see what Brandon saw and just having an encounter like that was worth me going on the trip just to see the excitement he got out of it.
Right.
Well, and I think I was the newbie there, right? Like the other two had been on previous trips before, so they were kind of used to it, where I was like just a fish out of water because they kept laughing at me.
Yeah, but that's the best way to go into one of those trips. I mean, we talked about it when Mike initially got back. Going there with expectations is more difficult than going there without really knowing what you're getting yourself into. And that fresh perspective gives you an appreciation for exactly what it is that you're experiencing. I think a little bit more than the guys that have been there and done that, maybe not in that exact spot, but I think you appreciate it more when you're fresh. And so I don't think that's a negative at all. I think that's you take away something more than what they got out of the same experience.
You've been listening to the Wild and Exposed podcast. If you haven't yet, please give us a rating and a review. And make sure you're subscribed so that you'll get every episode we produce as soon as we drop it. And as always, thanks for tuning in.
We're gonna make it someday. Nothing's gonna get in our way. We will be the biggest band in town. Round and round the world we'll go.